Good morning, St. David's. Our group norms are to start and end on time. So we should be, it is 11:20, we should be out of here by 11:50. Okay. We're here today to celebrate Margaret Mercer, who was a phenomenal woman, well ahead of her time, and you will probably notice that every time that you walk into, there, okay. Anytime you come onto the property, you see the historic marker that was erected in her memory and honor, and talks about a few of the things that she did. We have continued her legacy here by focusing on education, on outreach, on equality, and on faith, not necessarily all in that order, but we do try to make sure. Because of her foresight and her generosity, we actually have access to this property, which we did not take for granted, but through the workings of Victoria Hurd, you will see that she can find us a deed and make everything very much ours now. She came here from Maryland and set up basically an agricultural school that was going to be used to help educate both men and women, white and black, to do things that were going to better their health, to better their lives, and to make life itself a better place. She came to Belmont and wanted to make sure that she would challenge individuals. She did that both educationally and society-wise, to the point that she was really a woman unlike anybody else that you would have anticipated meeting in her day and age, because women did not have, in the 1700s in this country, actually really in the 1800s in this country, much of a say in anything. And she wanted to change that. And she wanted to make sure that we have all the things here. I'm not going to read the slides to you. You all are capable of reading yourselves. I'm just summarizing so that we'll have a few minutes for some questions and answers at the end. The chapel, which you can see the ruins through the window, was reportedly built by her slaves, and she paid them, which she did so in hopes that they would be able to eventually buy their freedom. And it was a place where all people were welcome. So our current motto, making this look like a place that looks and acts like Jesus, is very much a part of her legacy as well. The obelisk and the remains of the old church through here, she was originally buried near where the obelisk stands today, but because of her views on race, her remains were removed and returned to Maryland during the Civil War because they felt that Sherman would probably desecrate the grave. And I guess he didn't just burn Georgia. So she is buried out somewhere in Baltimore. I'll have to check that out the next time I'm over visiting my niece. Beg your pardon? Okay, she's in the family crypt? Thank you. Jim is my sidekick here. He has more information about this than I do. Okay. The Belmont Chapel, as it appeared in 1966 before it burned to the ground, or burned to the foundations. And you can see that it looks a little different than it looks out there now, and this isn't even the most overgrown that it ever was. The beginnings of St. David's. Okay. In 1967, the Reverend Victoria R.T. Hurd was serving as the assistant at St. James. The very first meeting to found this church was in the living room of David and Marion Boslow. They lived here in Ashburn. My husband was a senior warden at St. James at the time, so I have literally been involved with this church from the very first meeting, even though I never came here as a parishioner until 92, 93. My husband was senior warden there, and he was just a tad stubborn, and wasn't going to leave, and Bill Bakken finally, I think, wore him down. And any of you who knew Bill, you know exactly how he could do that. So there. As I mentioned earlier, she did, similar to what the property team has been doing here, going through all the files and looking and see whatever's there, and she found the deed to the land. And she also did something else that was, I'm sure Margaret Mercer would have approved. She took down the Confederate flag that flew inside St. James. St. James is a very old church. It has all the flags that had ever flown over Leesburg on one side, and then all the Episcopal ones on the other side. And we had individuals who would have to come in and sometimes sit, African Americans sitting beneath the Confederate flag. She said she was taking it down for cleaning. She cleaned it right into the garage, or into the garbage. And I'm sure that Margaret Mercer would have been very proud of her for doing that. The legal probe went into effect, and we were able then, in 1987, to start a program to establish the new church in Ashburn. Okay. John Smith was the longtime rector at St. James. He invited two parishioner families. That was David and Marion Boslow and Bill and Laura Bakken. They would eventually be joined by the Powells and by the Roys, and they started to found this particular church. They worshiped in a variety of places. There was some interesting conversation about what we were going to be called. St. Chad's came up because they also invited the youth of the church to choose a name. So it was good. Somehow I just don't think Chad would have, particularly now in the days of Chads and Dads, probably wouldn't have suited us too well. But Bishop Lee did approve the name of St. David's Episcopal Church. Go through here. The four families interviewed the ministerial candidate who Bishop Lee had asked them to do. Reverend Stephen, or Father Stephen, see, I have actually made the transition from father to reverend now, is still a very interesting person, and he was pretty sure that he was not going to be asked to return. Probably, I think, Bill Bakken maybe thought he wasn't Catholic enough. I'm not really sure, but Father Stephen was fairly Catholic, is still. But he did end up becoming not only the founding victor, but our first rector. St. David's inherited a quarter mile of pre-colonial Vestal's Gap Road, a portion of which is shown here. Carol Bonafat's husband took this picture, Vern, and this is kind of how we got to church. It was called the Rocky Road to Salvation. It was generously a one-lane path. You had to judge when the service was letting out, and the next one would start so that you would be able to go in without having to back up the entire length. Because there was one tiny little place that was a cutout. None of these great big full Hemi pickup trucks would have made it if they expected to pass. But for the first several years, that's the way we came to church. This is a very blurry picture of walking through the ruins. That's Father Stephen with the hat there. And I think probably Liz with the, but I'm not sure about that. That's kind of what it looked like, but still wasn't as bad as it was. That's what it looked like. I'm not sure how they got that little grater in there, but yeah, just a tad overgrown. And that, of course, is more what it looks like today. That's obviously an old picture because there's no columbarium, but that took some work. This is essentially a timeline that deals with the order of things from the first service in the Ashburn Village Community Center with approximately 35 people in attendance. As they moved forward, sometimes they moved to different places. It was at the Ryan Methodist Church. They had the first full service in the Millbot Chapel, was in a tent. For those of you who remember Father Stephen, he had this whole thing about incense and smoke. And he loved, I'm sure, the fact that that entire tent was filled with smoke because they started a fire inside a tent in the rain. So got a little smoky. I think that was his way of telling us to live right so we didn't end up in hell. And then they had a ground clearing day. Bishop Lee blessed the new site. The first service in the cafeteria at Ashburn Elementary, 130. And then we started the whole committee to start doing this. It was a challenge to actually get approval by Loudoun County, to say the least. But eventually it did. And it's ironic that one of my longtime friends was the main obstacle, Ann Cavanaugh. But she did come around, and she was here for the actual groundbreaking and participation when things were done. We had a few things there that there was a little issue with sewage, etc. Some things don't change. The groundbreaking was there. Ann Cavanaugh was the person who spoke there. The sewage pump and the hall permit were lost somewhere. I'm not sure those were ever found. So it was one of those, go ahead and do it and ask forgiveness. Don't ask permission because permission's been lost. And we made it just fine. The first service in and dedication of Mercer Hall was now the preschool, and where I first worshiped when I came here. And that was the entrance that we used to get into the church. It actually had a kitchen, not a large one, but it was there. You can do some prepping, etc. Then they completed the education office, which is now the administrative offices, Boslow Building. They had the first service and the new dedication October 17th, 1999 for this service, or for this church. Now, future plans, and I basically stopped with the history here because the rest of it, well, we only had 30 minutes. To restore fallen gravestones in the churchyard. A lot of that has been accomplished. To start the preschool, yes, they did that. To build a graded day school next to the sanctuary, kindergarten through grammar school. We now have a kindergarten class. We're doing baby steps, okay? Rebuild the Belmont Chapel for use as a columbarium. Found out that probably wasn't going to work too well, so we built a columbarium. And then to brazenly ask for more acreage as gifts from surrounding developers. And we did, okay? These are just some photos from throughout the time. This is Lift High the Cross. Father Stephen wanted to be up on a crane and actually put the cross up there himself, and obviously with a lot of help. If you look over here on the far right side, you will see a young man there with spectacles. That's our very own Andy Bloom. And some of the rest of those, and then you go ahead down, there's different ones. We are committed to her legacy outreach. We've had a relationship with the Bromley Girls' School in Liberia for quite some time. We've had an ongoing commitment to Loudoun Hunger Relief. Past efforts have included El Hogar and the Honduras, Backpack Buddies, Grace to Go, and future efforts are going to be in God's hand because we don't know exactly what our need will be or what we have the resources to do. But the interesting thing of keeping with her legacy is to make sure we never stop looking at how we can help. Our past, present, and future commitment to the Bromley School, you see there a memorial plaque to Bill Bakken, and some of the young ladies were there. They did have to close during COVID and have some things, but they are in the process of reopening. Continue with Margaret Mercer's legacy, education. For a while, before we had a whole lot of buildings and everything, they would meet around the ruins out there, outside. That's Bill Bakken in the center there, teaching, and lots of folks sitting around making sure that that was an ongoing process. Dwight Shively, is that his last name? Shiley, okay. Was here. He used to run a lot of Bible studies, and at one point we actually had periodically Wednesday evening potluck dinners with Bible study in the narthex out there. And then, of course, that is a very, very uncluttered, clean, unused preschool, obviously when they're getting ready for the students to arrive. And then our spiritual leaders, because we get nowhere without them. The Reverend Victoria Hurd led the drive to found it. The St. David's, Reverend Stephen McWhorter, Reverend Kevin Phillips, Reverend Emmanuel Johnson, who was priest in charge between Kevin and Reverend Mary Kay, Reverend Susan, the interim, and of course, now Reverend Stephen Haggerty. Questions? I've got 15 minutes, guys. Any questions for me, Jim, Alan? Yes?
What do we know about the students that were at the school? What do we know about the students that were at
Yeah, during her, I don't know that we know anything. Yeah.
Came to live on the campus in Belmont. It was a boarding school. And they came and lived on the campus here. And then there were, at that time, Ashburn was called something else. Thank you, Farmwell. And so some of the students came from there, and of course some of the students were slaves on the plantation itself. I don't know that there's ever been any history or much written about them. I've never seen anything.
Yeah, I don't remember reading anything at all about who they were, except in that very general term, and, you know, like did they go on to remain in Loudoun County, or I don't know. Richard?
I recall, and please clarify, that there are graves on this site of folks that were enslaved. Is that true or false? That there are graves of people that were slaves?
We never found a grave that included slaves. As you know, the cemetery for the enslaved at the corner of the old Belmont property over by Loudoun, they have claimed that as a slave cemetery. I don't really know much about it. In this cemetery, when we took the property back, there were about 30 or 40 headstones, all identifiable people. Then shortly after we started to work on the property, one weekend vandals came in and stole a whole bunch of the headstones. And so if you walk into the cemetery today, you'll see the old headstones, some coming from the late 1700s, all the way up to a brand new large modern gravestone, which is the names of all the people whose headstones were stolen. But there's no proof, tangible proof, that the enslaved might have been buried here. My guess is it happened, but that's just my guess.
But I know the slave cemetery up the road here on the other side is really quite impressive if you go and look at it. And Pastor Michelle Thomas's son, who drowned in the Potomac, is actually buried there.
There is a section that's kind of surrounded by the graves that we know of, that when they were clearing the property, they brought in some people from West Virginia to find the depressions, and there is probably, I'm going to guess, about 20 unmarked graves there. Who they are, we don't know.
Thank you. Carol?
We sign up to give our gratefulness to the Lord. Did you talk about the cholera epidemic?
The collar?
cholera. It was, Margaret Mercer was not well received due to her broad-mindedness.
Right.
And therefore, people didn't like her and didn't want to be associated with her. But cholera came out, and this was farm country. So there were families with 10 and 12 children, and people were dropping like flies in death, obviously. And finally, she got in her horse and buggy and started traveling around, going from farm to farm, explaining the privies had to be moved where they had to go, explaining that all water had to be boiled before they used it, before they did their cleaning, before they prepared their food, and then people stopped dying. Then the thought of Margaret Mercer was far kinder at that point. And later on, I can't give you all the dates. My husband's not here, and he knew all the dates. But she worked with a gentleman in Richmond, and they developed a fertilizer. And the fertilizer was used up here at the farms in Loudoun County, and the crops prospered.
Thank you, Carol. I did not include that in her background. I do remember reading that and her work with the cholera and just how many people she actually kept alive because of her studies and her commitment to science.
Yes, reinforcing Carol, I heard similar information from a different angle on her, that Margaret Mercer was way ahead of her time, and that she drained the swamps, and that was one of the impacts against cholera. But in all subjects, she was way ahead of her time, and you look at how she was honored by her students. So I think over time she got increased recognition for everything she did.
Thank you. Maureen.
A few years ago, we were in the office, and a random day, and Bobby, you may recall this also, two gentlemen had stopped in, and one was her great-grandson and great-great-grandson, I believe. They were starting to do research on Margaret Mercer, and it circled her back, of course, to St. David's, and Bobby was great. I called and she came in, but it was so exciting to actually meet someone, like a real person, even though we know Margaret Mercer is real, but you know, somebody here tangible in this day and age that was in their family wanting to continue that, you know, legacy. So it was really wonderful that they, and thank you that day for coming in and for teaching them what you knew, you know, about her legacy here.
All I did was compile all of the histories that are put in boxes and different files into one spot. And now I have found that there's been major portions of that missing, so I have more work to do. Which reminds me, sometime in the next few months, I'll be looking for people to help me redo some of the history, not remake it, but redo its compilation. And using some of the documents, and we've got to scan in some of the original letters. They're fantastic. I can almost read some of them because my dad was old and he wrote like that. And you think I laugh. My father was born in 1895, so he was 57 years older than my mother. Marilyn.
Just one comment. The land started with Victoria. It was 2.5 acres. Right now our campus is roughly around 9 acres.
So we did get more acreage.
The fun thing, I think, is that we sued IBM because they thought they owned the land. And when we won, because a cemetery counts as continuous occupancy,
Yes.
they donated another 2 to 3 acres. And then when Toll Brothers wanted to build Whole Foods Plaza and all that, they donated the rest, because they took over our road.
Yeah.
We traded, basically.
Yes, we did lay claim to the deed because we had had continuous occupation of the land.
What's her
she live there at one point or own it? I kind of Googled a little bit. I know the history of that, but not with her.
I don't know if it was called Belmont at that particular, it was? Okay.
Yeah,
Belmont was this side of 170.
right.
Plantation called Totten was the other side. That's Totten with a single T. And those were the two big landholdings in this part of Ashburn. Ashburn is considered to be poor soil. And if you live in Ashburn Village and tried to plant, you understand that very much. But yeah, that was the plantation building, the current plantation building, and others. But the current plantation building was in fact her home. And also because it was a boarding school, that's where some of the girls lived.
Other questions? Yes.
First, thank you for all this information, and I make a request. Can you make this presentation available on the website? I mean, it's terrific information, and I'd love to be able to access it and understand it even better.
I think it is going to be there. I know they're recording this right now, which won't be the first time they've been recorded as I'm teaching, but also what I'd like to do is eventually get a link to all of the history on there.
Right,
So,
yeah, and this presentation would be
the
terrific.
presentation
Thank
is
you.
Definitely going. Three minutes. Any last minute? Over here.
Just a quick note, where we're sitting here received an architectural award.
Yes, it did. We were written up in Architectural Digest, much to Father Stephen's pleasure.
Are there any biographies of Margaret Mercer?
Yes.
Okay.
There are two biographies. Stephen McWhorter and I eventually tracked them down in England. And we discovered there were two editions, which was a surprise. We only thought there was one. We eventually found both of them and purchased them. And Reverend Stephen has them. The only difference between the first book and the second book was a 3-page addition at the front end, where the author wrote that the demand had been so heavy that within less than 3 months after he published the first edition, they had to publish a second edition. They are in pretty good shape physically. So if you talk to Stephen, and I'm sure he'd be willing to share them with you.
Jim, is that the digital copy that I think I might have a version of? I'm not sure if it's the same. I'm not sure.
All right.
And would we search for the PDF just under Margaret Mercer? Or biography of Margaret Mercer? Okay, thank you. Anything else? Yes.
I just wanted to go back to the question about whether or not there were enslaved people buried on the property. For those of you who don't know, I'm an archaeologist. I do work in Loudoun County, including cemetery delineations and pedestrian survey for cemeteries specifically for the enslaved. Loudoun County has specific rules about pedestrian survey for burial grounds for the enslaved. It's unlikely, the history of the property being so unique in that there were students taught here, they may be buried out there. I know someone said there's probably at least 20 unmarked graves out there. But typically, enslaved people would have been buried relatively close to wherever their quarters were, in unmarked areas that often get developed after the fact. So to answer that question, probably not.
All right, thank you all for staying. Thank you, Bob. And it is on time.